G'day legends. Name a snare sound that is more iconic than the Paramore's Misery Business snare tone. That thing has gone down in history as probably one of the most massive, awesome sounding snare drums known to man. Now, I think I accidentally stumbled across recreating this snare sound the other night while I was mixing a cover of the song. And I posted a little clip on my Instagram and a whole bunch of people hit me up saying, how did you make that snare sound? You need to make a video and show us what you did. So I figured, sure, why not? Let's dive into this session and I'll show you how I mixed this snare sound and how I think I got it to sound pretty close to the real thing. But even if you don't want to muck around with trying to recreate this, you just want that snare sound, I have made a sample of this. I've got a bunch of one-shots that I've created, as well as a Trigger 2 TCI file, which has a round robin of 8 samples. And if you want to grab that, I'll have a link to it in the description below. Just head over to my website. It's going to be a couple of bucks. Now, we can't play too much with Paramore in the background while we go through this because the video will get flagged for copyright. So that's all you're going to get. But this is what it sounds like in the context of just the drum mix. Pretty awesome. And now this is the trigger that I created. So a massive snare sound. Now there's quite a bit to cover here because there's a few sounds that are all kind of working together to achieve this. So I'm going to go through this really fast. Feel free to pause the screen at any point to look at any processing, but I'm just going to blitz through this because otherwise it'll take really long. So first things first, let's take a look at the drum bus where everything is being sent. So we've got virtual mix racks from Slate Digital and there's pretty much nothing on this. It just has the VCC channel and a trimmer. I just had this on there in case I needed to trim it. So you can ignore that, but it is there. It's mildly doing something with that VCC. Then we have FG Grey. This is just like an SSL style compressor. We're doing like the Nolly style compression. We've got that 0.3 fast attack, not the fastest, but the next fastest. And then we're doing the fastest release. So it lets the snare transient just get through and then it grabs it and crushes down on it. We're doing a 3:1 ratio. And then we have the high pass filter at 50 Hertz. And that looks and sounds like this. Couple of dBs of gain reduction. And then I have the Waves L3 LL Ultra Maximizer. If you've watched any of my videos, you know, these are pretty much like staples on my drum bus, but yeah, just go-to plugins for me. This is basically just stopping any loud peaks. So you see in this mix, it's not really doing anything. It's just there just in case. Okay, that is the drum bus. Now we also have parallel compression going on. So all of the kick, snare, toms, overheads, all that stuff is being sent to our crush bus, which has VMR in it with the distressor, so FG stress. And this has the fastest attack, fastest release. We've got a 6:1 ratio and a distortion on 3. And just basically crushing this. So not really letting any transient through. We just want to smash it up and get a lot of sustain out of the drums. So you can hear it's mostly kick and snare and toms, little bit of cymbals in there. All right, so that's just there to make the drum sound really big. Now let's have a look at the actual snare because we've got 4 channels here that are working together to create this sound. We have the actual snare mic, which sounds like this. We've got our first snare trigger. We've got our second snare trigger. And then we've got the Snare Bottom Mic. So they all sound like this combined. So pretty big, roomy sounding snare drum. And they're all being sent to a group, which is where I'm processing the snare all together. And on that group, I just have a little bit of EQ. So we have a small boost at 173 Hertz, just bringing out the low end, and then a tiny high shelf, 1.5 dBs from about 8K upwards, just to add a little bit of extra crack to the snare. And then after that, I have Black Box, and I'm using the Snare-tacular preset. It's just a great preset for just smashing a snare drum. And then I'm pulling the mix knob back all the way to 18%. So we'll bypass the EQ and Black Box off and on so you can hear what it's adding to the overall snare sound. So it's giving it some extra energy and excitement, just that little bit of extra low end and high end from the EQ, and then that beefiness that the saturation's adding to it. Just makes it sound a bit bigger. So keep that in mind, that all of these channels are being sent into this processing. Now we're going to take a look at these individual channels. So this is what the Snare Mic sounds like raw. So quite dark and bit of ring to it. What I wanted to do with this was basically just like make it snappy and punchy and then kind of get all of the extra sound out of the samples. So I've got the Brainworks SSL 4000E channel strip, cranking a bell at 8K, just full 15 dBs added into that. And then we're boosting at 6.2K, about 5 dBs there with a kind of like narrow bell. So that's going to add a bit of extra snap to the top end as well. And then we're doing a cut at 942 Hertz with a narrow band, taking about 7.5 dBs out of that, so just scooping it out a bit. And then we've got a bell at 164 Hertz, we're boosting that up about 9.5 dBs. So have a listen to what this is adding to it. So it's bringing that snare to life. Then we also have the expander on here, which is just helping gate the sound a little bit. So tidying it up a little bit. And then we also have some compression going on here. We've got the ratio just like cranked to basically a limiter, and then the fastest release, and then just pulling it down till we get a couple of dBs of gain reduction. Then after that, I did some debleeding using Pro MB. And if you watch my channel, you probably know this trick, fast attack, basically a fast release, about 10% on the release there. Just lets the air through just a little bit longer. And then I've got it set to a 7-8 dB range, not too crazy, but just enough to pull the cymbals down a bit. And it's an expander mode, so every time the snare hits, it lifts. So tidying the snare up just a little bit more. Then we have virtual mix racks after that, and we're doing a bunch of processing here. So a high shelf on the top end, so 6K, boosting up about 5 dBs, just gonna bring a bit more snap out of the drum. Doing a small cut at around 332 Hertz with a really narrow bell, just sort of pulling out a bit of ring of the drum, and then a 3 dB boost at around 197 Hertz with a bell. That's just, again, adding a bit of body to the snare. And then we're going into the FG stress. And we have the attack at around 6 and the release at around 3, bit of whatever makeup gain just to level it out, and then a 4:1 ratio. And then we're going into a transient designer, which is adding just a little bit of extra transient attack and sustain. And then we're also going into revival, boosting some air, boosting some low, and then we have some saturation on the end, just pushing this up till it starts to kind of get a little distorted, and then pull the mix back to around 16%. So trying to add some extra beefiness to this snare mic. And then I've got this silly EQ here. Basically, I just wanted to pull a lot of the ring out of the drum and just try and get more of that smiley face going, because we have the samples with all the ringy sound in them as well. So I think I decided just to cut a bit of this away from the close mic. So again, another small boost, 170 Hertz. We're doing like a notch here at 246 Hertz where there's like a ring in the snare. Just wanted to clean that up. And then a big cut at 346 Hertz, pulling out some of this mid-range again, 7 dBs there. So really focusing in on that fundamental frequency. And then a fairly wide cut at around 1K, just around 1 dB of that. And then a 4 dB boost at 6K, just adding some more air again. So as you can see, I'm EQing this snare pretty aggressively. There's multiple stages of EQ, and I'm kind of hyping similar points because I just need more of it. So that currently sounds like this. So it's not super pretty, but in the mix, it sounds good. After this, we've got Black Salt Audio's Clipper. just making sure the performance gets evened out a little bit. And then just one more stage of EQ, just cutting some of the really high frequencies. So from 10K up, decided we're getting a little too much hi-hat. Rather than going back and like changing stuff, sometimes I just prefer to put an EQ on the end and just make the adjustment there. So that's just what's happening here. It's just like, we're getting a little too much like cymbal coming in. So a 5 dB cut from 10K. Sounds pretty cool. All right, so that is our close mic. Now I had silencer on here because I was testing between Pro and B and silencer, and I just liked how Pro and B worked in this mix. Okay, so our first sample. So I'm using Trigger 2, and I'm using a sample from the David Bender expansion pack from Stephen Slate Drums. And I've loaded in the Vinnie Paul samples here. So this is pretty much like the snare that was used on Paramore. They used the ugly snake skin wrapped snare drum, the Vinnie Paul signature, and it's like such an iconic snare drum now just because of this reason. Pretty much going straight to the source and getting that kind of sound. Now have a listen to what this sample sounds like. So it's kind of a dirty snare sound, like a lot of ring in it, just a lot of dirt. It doesn't have like heaps of cracky top end to it. Like there's a little bit of sizzle, but it's more mid-rangey. So that's where we're getting a lot of like the beefiness out of the snare and that dirty sustain. Like it adds a lot to the sound. So you can have a look. That's how I had my levels in this set. And then I also pitched it up a little bit just to match our real snare drum. Okay, then we just have VMR after that. We've got VCC as our first channel, just adding that SSL desk sound to our signal. And then we're boosting our high shelf from 7K and we're boosting that up 6 dBs. And then we're doing a small cut around 3.5 dBs at 548 Hertz, just getting rid of a little bit of the dirtiness out of the snare. And then a 4 dB boost with a bell at around 178 Hertz. And then again, using the FG stress, that distressor sound just gives us like all of that power and excitement. It's a great compressor for making loud drums. We've got the attack at 8 and the release at 4. Having that slightly medium fast release, like it's not like super fast, it's still fast, but it just lets the transient grab a little bit and it doesn't all just become like a big smashy sound. So you still get the attack of the drum. We've got 3:1 ratio and distortion on 3. And then we've got the air module from within VMR and we're just boosting that knob 1.5 dBs. Just adds a little bit of top end to it. So we're adding some sizzle to it, a bit of smack, making it like bite a little bit more. But we've still got like the dirty ring and the sustain, which sounds really cool. And all of the room sound that comes from the sample as well is a big factor to this. Hear all of that ambience, it's very important. So then we have our second trigger sample, and this is from the CLA expansion pack from Stephen Slate Drums, and this is the Snare Pearl Brass. Again, I pitched this one down to match it in with all of our other snare sounds. So a lot more snap and bite in the upper mids and the top end, just a really cracky snare drum sound. And then again, we've got VMR, almost similar settings. So we're doing a bell boost this time at 7K, 4.3 dBs, and then a little boost, 1.3 dBs at around 3K. So just adding that bite and aggression to the drum. And then a 4 dB boost at around 240 Hertz with a bell. And then again, into our FG stress, we're pretty much the same settings, but we're using distortion 2 for this one. Really making that reverb and room sound that's included in that trigger really pop out and sustain a bit more, which is really cool because that's all part of this big explosive snare sound. And then we've got our snare bottom, and basically with this is what it sounds like raw. So I'm adding a bunch of air to it. We've got a high shelf boosting up around 10 dBs from 6K. And I'm doing a small cut at around 2K, just getting rid of like some, I don't know, like upper mids that don't sound very nice. And then a cut in the mids at around 580 Hertz. Scooping it out a little bit. And then we've just got a bell boost at around 180 Hertz. adding some body back into the low end. And then we've got some compression. I didn't really touch anything besides pull the threshold down to get a couple of dBs of gain reduction. And then we've got our expanded gate on here, and we're only letting it fall down around 11 dBs. So we lose a little bit of that kick bleed that's in there, and we get most of like the snare wire hits. So all of this stuff is combined to make our sound, right? So that's pretty cool. That's like most of the sound right there. So the important thing is the blend of these sounds to achieve like that big explosive sound. So our close mic is still a really important part of this drum mix, even though it's like not adding all of that big explosive stuff like the rooms that the samples bring to it. This is really important in bringing like the fullness and the body and like the fundamental of the snare, because I'll show you what it sounds like. This is the samples on their own, right? So when you don't have that snare mic in there, they just lose a little bit of body. It still sounds cool, but have a listen to it in the full drum mix without the close mic. If you were just to replace it and put samples in, it doesn't cut it. So you can hear the close mic and the snare bottom, they're just bringing the thickness and the fullness to the sound, and then the triggers are just adding like the big excitement to it. And the blend between those two samples, I have the CLA sample a little bit louder just to get that crack in the cut. And then we have the David Bender sample just blended in a little bit lower, just so we're getting like the ring and the body that it adds. So that's a really important part of it, is just getting the blend of that stuff right. Now the actual like overhead and rooms probably aren't that detrimental to the mix that's going on here. Like if we take these out, the snare still sounds the same, so we're not going to worry about the processing of the overheads. But basically with the overheads and the room mics, I did high pass these and get rid of a lot of the low end out of them. So if you have a listen to the overhead on its own, so I high-passed a bunch of low end out of this just because I put more focus on the kick close mics and the samples that I was using rather than like doing it in the overheads. But this doesn't really affect our snare drum because we're still keeping a lot of the snare sound in this, just getting rid of a bunch of like the kick sound. This stuff here is just like cutting the cymbals because they just sounded kind of nastier in the upper mids. So I did a similar thing with the room mics where I just high-passed a bunch of the low end and low-passed a bit of the top end. Nothing too crazy going on there. And the room mics aren't even that loud in this mix because we're taking a lot of that sound from the samples. We also have a really short reverb on the snare. So from our Snare Bus, we're sending this to a reverb send, and it has the LX480's Essentials reverb on here. And I'm using the drum ambience preset. And I think I adjusted the time to 1.7. Have a listen to what this sounds like. So it's just adding, again, just some more dimension to the sound and making it a little bit bigger overall. But it's not super loud in the mix because you can hear that the samples are adding a lot of room sound to what we've got already anyway. On the mix bus, there's a couple of things that are also adding to the overall sound here. We've got the SSL bus compressor with a 4:1 ratio, and we're doing a 3 millisecond attack and an auto release, a couple of dBs of gain reduction. That's just adding like the overall glue to the full mix. And then I've got virtual tape machines. This is actually adding probably quite a bit to the sound. We've got it on the 30 IPS setting, and it just makes it sound a whole lot bigger and thicker. Have a listen to that. Just love what that's doing to the drums. Like that definitely could be an important part of this. And if you open up settings, I have pulled down the bass alignment just a little bit, just to get a little bit of that extra bass that it's adding and just like pull it back a smidge, just because the kick was getting like real pumpy. And then after that, I've got the Kiive Audio M5133 mastering EQ, just doing some small EQ moves. This is like -1 dB to some low mids, boosting 1.3 dBs to like a high shelf from 13K. And then we've got a 1 dB boost at 1.5K with a wide bell, just adding some mids to the mix. And that's about it. Tiny little bit of saturation, I think, pushing the third harmonics up a little bit, and then the mix knob at 50%. A little bit of clipping with K-Clip 3. This is gonna grab like snare peaks, basically, anywhere between like 1 to 3 dBs maybe. And then I've just got FabFilter's Pro Attil on the end, just pushing into the limiter. And all of that does add to the sound, because when you take this away, it doesn't sound quite as big, because the overall limiting of the track adds to that sort of like big, loud sound. So this could still be part of the overall sound. So I think that covers pretty much everything that has to do with the snare sound and making it sound that way. Again, I'm not sure if you follow these steps, you'll be able to recreate it exactly the same, but that's what I did to get the Paramore snare sound. And again, if you don't want to bother with this and you just want a sample of it, there's a link in the description below. You can go grab the one-shots as well as the trigger TCI file that I've made for this. And again, it sounds like this. So pretty fat sample. That's just gonna be over on the website, couple of bucks, nothing big. If you don't wanna bother stuffing around with all of this, you can just go grab that sample. So personally, I'm pretty stoked with that snare sound, and I'm glad that a bunch of you guys were too, and you all messaged me on Instagram saying, please make a video showing how you got that snare sound. I hope you guys found this helpful, and if you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and if you guys wanna support this channel, check out the description link below. Head over to my website. I have a bunch of drum sample packs over there, stuff that works with Trigger 2, as well as just like one-shot stuff and samples that you can just load into any sampler of your choice, as well as a couple of mixing courses. Grabbing any of that stuff really helps support the time that goes into making videos like this. And if you guys are interested in checking out my one-shot sample pack, then check out this next video coming up.